Catalina Rivera had stopped believing in second chances long before she sat alone at that corner table, watching the door like it might offer her something other than humiliation. The restaurant hummed around her, laughter spilling from nearby tables, glasses clinking in celebration, the low murmur of conversations that belonged to people whose nights were unfolding exactly as planned. Hayes was not. The candle between her hands had burned down to a stub, wax pooling around the base like tears she refused to shed. 40 minutes had passed since the agreed-upon time. Then 50. Then an hour. She had checked her phone so many times the screen had gone dark from exhaustion, mirroring her own. The waiter had stopped asking if she wanted to order. His pity was a language she understood too well. Soft eyes, apologetic smile, the way he refilled her water glass without a word. She hated it, hated that she had worn her good dress, the one she'd been saving. Hated that she'd let herself hope. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. She'd been stood up before, but never like this. Never after weeks of messages that felt like promises. Never after he'd said, *I can't wait to finally see you. She should have known better. She always should have known better. Before we go on, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. Catalina's life had been a series of almosts. Almost graduated before her mother got sick. Almost saved enough money before the hospital bills swallowed everything. Almost found stability before the landlord raised the rent again. She worked 2 jobs, mornings at a bakery where the smell of bread clung to her clothes, evenings cleaning offices where the silence pressed against her like a weight. She was 27 and felt 50. Her hands were rough from work, her shoulders tight from carrying burdens no one could see. She had no family left except a younger brother she was trying to keep in school, and friends who had slowly drifted away because exhaustion leaves little room for connection. Dating had been a mistake. She'd known it even as she'd created the profile, even as she'd swiped through faces that promised nothing and delivered less. But loneliness is a specific kind of hunger, one that gnaws from the inside out. She'd matched with Daniel 3 weeks ago. He'd seemed kind, patient. He'd asked about her day, remembered small details, made her laugh when she'd forgotten how. He'd suggested dinner at this place, a restaurant she couldn't afford but didn't say so, and she'd said yes because for once, she wanted to feel like someone worth showing up for. But Daniel never came. And as the second hour approached, Catalina finally stood, smoothing down her dress with trembling hands, refusing to meet the waiter's eyes as she gathered her coat. Shame burned hot in her chest, spreading through her limbs like poison. She fumbled for her wallet, prepared to pay for the water and the humiliation, when a shadow fell across her table. "Stay." The voice was low, commanding, and entirely unfamiliar. Catalina looked up and found herself staring into the face of a man who did not belong in her world. He was tall, dressed in a suit that cost more than her monthly rent, with dark hair swept back from a face carved from stone and silence. His eyes were gray, the color of storms gathering on the horizon, and they held her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wasn't asking. He was telling. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice smaller than she wanted. "Sit down," he said again, softer this time but no less absolute. "Please." She should have walked away. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to escape whatever this was. But something in his tone, something almost gentle beneath the command, made her sink back into her chair. He sat across from her, occupying the space Daniel had abandoned, and suddenly the restaurant felt different. Smaller, quieter, as if the world had narrowed to just this table, just this moment, just him. "My name is Dante Moetti," he said, and the name landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. "And the man who was supposed to meet you tonight made the biggest mistake of his life." Catalina's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name, even if they pretended not to. Dante Moetti was not a man you talked about in daylight. He was whispered about in darkened corners, in news reports that used words like asterisk alleged asterisk and asterisk suspected asterisk but never asterisk proven to asterisk. He was power wrapped in expensive fabric, danger disguised as civility. And he was sitting across from her, studying her face like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You don't need to," Dante replied. "Not yet." He signaled the waiter with a subtle gesture, and suddenly the man who had pitied her was treating her like royalty. Menus appeared. Wine was poured. Dante ordered for them both without asking what she wanted, and she should have been offended but found herself too stunned to protest. He spoke with the ease of someone who had never been told no, whose life had unfolded exactly as he designed it. And yet, when he looked at her, there was something in his gaze that wasn't entitlement. It was curiosity, hunger, recognition. "Why are you doing this?" Catalina asked when the waiter left. Dante leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Because I saw you sitting here alone, and it seemed like a crime." "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I'd like to." It was insane. All of it. This man, this night, the way her pulse raced not with fear but something far more dangerous. Catalina had spent her entire life being invisible, slipping through the world unnoticed, unremarkable. And now Dante Moetti, a man who could have anyone, anything, was looking at her like she mattered, like she was worth the interruption of his evening, worth the attention of those storm-gray eyes. Dinner arrived, and they ate in a silence that felt strangely comfortable. He didn't press her with questions, didn't try to fill the space with meaningless conversation. He simply existed across from her, solid and undeniable, and Catalina found herself relaxing despite every rational thought telling her not to. The food was exquisite, each bite melting on her tongue, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten something that wasn't fuel, wasn't just survival. "Tell me something true," Dante said suddenly, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "What?" "Something true about yourself. Something you don't tell people." Catalina hesitated, her fingers tightening around her fork. "Why would I do that?" "Because I asked," he said simply, "and because lies are boring." She should have refused, should have made an excuse and left. But there was something in his eyes, a challenge, yes, but also an invitation. A promise that whatever she said would be held carefully, treated with a respect she hadn't known in years. "I'm tired," she said finally, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "All the time. I'm so tired of fighting just to survive, of waking up every morning wondering if today's the day everything falls apart. I'm tired of being strong when I don't feel strong at all. I'm tired of being alone." The confession hung between them, raw and vulnerable, and Catalina immediately regretted it. But Dante didn't look away, didn't offer empty platitudes or false comfort. He simply nodded, as if she'd confirmed something he'd already known. "You won't be any more," he said. "Won't be what?" "Alone." And just like that, Catalina Rivera's life pivoted on an axis she hadn't known existed. She didn't understand it yet, didn't know that this moment would change everything, that the man sitting across from her would become both her salvation and her cage. She only knew that when Dante Moetti looked at her, she felt seen, truly seen. For the first time in her life, she felt like she mattered. The check came, though she never saw Dante pay it. He simply stood, extending his hand to her like a gentleman from another era. "Let me take you home." "I can take the bus," she said automatically. "I know you can," Dante replied. "But you won't. Not tonight." And she didn't. She let him lead her out into the cool night air, let him guide her to a car that looked like it belonged in a museum, let him open the door for her with a courtesy that felt both anachronistic and utterly natural. As the city lights blurred past the window, Catalina tried to tell herself this was just a strange, kind gesture from a stranger, that tomorrow she'd wake up and life would return to normal. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to examine too closely, she knew the truth. Normal had ended the moment Dante Moetti sat down at her table, and whatever came next would be anything but ordinary. The car moved through the city like a predator, sleek, silent, inevitable. Catalina sat in leather seats softer than any bed she'd ever slept in, her hands folded in her lap, trying not to touch anything. trying not to think about what this meant, what she'd agreed to by accepting this ride. Dante sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, far enough that he wasn't crowding her. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the restaurant, and the silence between them felt heavy with unasked questions. She gave the driver her address, a fourth-floor walk-up in a neighborhood where the street lights flickered and the walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors' arguments. She waited for judgment, for the subtle shift in Dante's expression that would tell her he'd reconsidered, that she wasn't worth this trouble after all. But his face remained impassive, those gray eyes focused on something beyond the window, or perhaps on nothing at all. When they pulled up to her building, Catalina reached for the door handle, already forming the words to thank him, to end this strange evening and retreat back into the safety of her ordinary, exhausting life. But Dante's hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm, stopping her mid-motion. "Wait," he said. The driver stepped out, came around, opened her door with the same careful courtesy Dante had shown at the restaurant. She climbed out onto the cracked sidewalk, her heels clicking against concrete that had seen better decades. Dante followed, his presence transforming the shabby street into something else entirely. He didn't belong here. He stood out like a diamond in doubt, and yet he moved with the confidence of a man who belonged everywhere simply because he chose to be there. "Thank you," Catalina said, the words feeling inadequate. "For dinner. For everything." "I'll walk you up," Dante replied, and it wasn't a question. "That's not necessary." "I know." He gestured toward the building's entrance, that small smile playing at the corner of his mouth again. "But I will anyway." They climbed the 4 flights in silence, her footsteps echoing in the stairwell, his barely making a sound. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting strange shadows across the water-stained walls. Catalina felt shame creeping up her spine with each step, acutely aware of the peeling paint, the graffiti on the second-floor landing, the smell of fried food and desperation that clung to everything. This was her life. This was what she'd been trying to escape when she'd agreed to meet Daniel, when she'd dared to hope for something better. At her door, she fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking slightly. "Thank you again," she said, not meeting his eyes. "I should." "Catalina." The way he said her name made her look up. He was standing closer than she'd realized, near enough that she could see the precise line of his jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes softened when they met hers. "What's your phone number?" "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because yo." She gestured vaguely at him, at his suit, at the car waiting below, at everything he represented. "And I'm." "What you are," Dante said softly, "is worth knowing." "The number, Catalina." She gave it to him. She didn't know why, didn't know what compelled her to recite those 10 digits that would become a bridge between her world and his. But she did, and he entered them into his phone with movements that were precise, deliberate, final, as if by saving her information, he'd claimed something, marked something, decided something. "Sleep well," he said, and then he was gone, his footsteps disappearing down the stairs, leaving her standing in the hallway with her heart racing and her mind spinning with questions she couldn't answer. That night, Catalina barely slept. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where the plaster had cracked into patterns that looked like rivers of veins, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Dante Moetti, the Dante Moetti, had sat across from her, had bought her dinner, had asked for her number. It felt like a dream, the kind that would dissolve with morning light, leaving only the residue of something that might have been. But when her phone buzzed at 7 a.m., just as she was dragging herself out of bed for her shift at the bakery, the dream became real. Asterisk good morning, Catalina. I hope you slept better than I did. Asterisk. She stared at the message for a full minute before responding. Asterisk why didn't you sleep? Asterisk. His reply came immediately. Asterisk because I was thinking about you. Asterisk. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. She should ignore it. Should delete the message and his number and pretend last night never happened. Instead, she wrote back, Asterisk you don't even know me. Asterisk. Asterisk then let me learn. Asterisk a pause. Then, asterisk have dinner with me tonight. Asterisk. Asterisk I can't. I work until 9. Asterisk. Asterisk tomorrow then. Asterisk. Asterisk I work tomorrow too. Asterisk. Asterisk when don't you work? Asterisk. The question landed with unexpected weight. When didn't she work? The answer was almost never. Her life was a cycle of labor and exhaustion, bills and survival, with no space for anything that resembled rest or joy. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a full day off, let alone time to spend on something as frivolous as dinner with a man who made her pulse race. Asterisk Sunday, asterisk she typed finally. Asterisk I have Sunday afternoons. Asterisk. Asterisk perfect. I'll pick you up at 2. Asterisk. Before she could protest, before she could think of all the reasons this was a terrible idea, he sent one more message. Asterisk where something comfortable. We're not going to a restaurant. Asterisk. And that was how it began. Not with grand declarations or sweeping romance, but with text messages and Sunday afternoons and the slow, inexorable pull of Dante Moetti into her carefully constructed life. He picked her up that Sunday in a different car, something less ostentatious, and drove her out of the city to a stretch of coastline where the ocean met the sky in shades of gray and blue. They walked along the beach, her shoes dangling from her fingers, the sand cold beneath her feet, and he asked her questions. Not the usual questions. Not where she was from or what she did for fun or what her favorite movie was. He asked her what she was afraid of, what she wanted that she'd never said out loud, what kept her awake at night besides exhaustion. And somehow, impossibly, she answered. She told him about her mother's death, about the medical debt that still haunted her, about her brother who was brilliant and deserved better than the hand life had dealt him. She told him about the loneliness that lived in her bones, about the fear that this was all her life would ever be, work and bills and slow, grinding survival. Dante listened without interrupting, his hands in his pockets, his profile sharp against the horizon. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "You deserve more than this." "We all deserve more than we get," Catalina replied. "No." He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. "You deserve everything." The intensity in his voice startled her, made something in her chest crack open. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "Then I'll learn," Dante said, "until I can prove it to you." They saw each other every Sunday after that. Sometimes they walked. Sometimes they drove to places she'd never been. Small towns tucked into hillsides, vineyards that stretched toward mountains, quiet cafes where nobody knew his name or cared who he was. He never talked about his work, never mentioned the shadows that clung to his reputation. He asked about her instead, memorizing the details of her life with a focus that felt almost sacred. Her favorite color, the way she took her coffee, the song she hummed when she thought no one was listening. 6 weeks passed like this. 6 Sundays that became the anchor of her week, the thing she looked forward to even when everything else felt impossible. She started to feel something dangerous growing in her chest, not just attraction, not just gratitude, but something deeper. Something that scared her because she knew, instinctively, that Dante Moetti was not a man you loved halfway. He was all or nothing, storm or sunshine, salvation or destruction. And then, on the 7th Sunday, everything changed. He picked her up as usual, but his expression was different, tighter, darker, like clouds gathering before a tempest. They drove in silence, and instead of the coast or the mountains, he took her to a house. Not a house, an estate. Gates opened at their approach, revealing grounds that seemed to stretch forever, gardens manicured to perfection, and at the center, a mansion that looked like it had been pulled from another century. "Where are we?" Catalina asked as the car stopped in front of the entrance. "Somewhere safe," Dante replied. He turned to her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something close to uncertainty in his eyes. "I need to tell you something. About who I am. What I do. And then I need to ask you to trust me." Fear coiled in her stomach. "Dante." "Not he." He opened his door. Inside. She followed him into the house, her footsteps echoing on marble floors, her eyes trying to take in the opulence that surrounded her, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. He led her to a study lined with books, poured her a glass of water she didn't drink, and then stood before her with his hands clasped behind his back like a soldier preparing for battle. "You know what they say about me," he began. "What people whisper. I've heard things. Most of it's true." He didn't flinch, didn't apologize. "I run an organization. We operate outside the law when the law fails to protect what matters. We have enemies, dangerous ones. And recently, those enemies have started noticing the people I care about." The words hung in the air, heavy and terrible. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that by being seen with me, you've become visible to people who would hate you to hate me." Dante's jaw tightened. "I'm saying that 3 days ago, someone took pictures of us together. And yesterday, one of my men stopped a car that was following yours home from work." The world tilted. Catalina sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "You're telling me I'm in danger because of you?" "Yes." "And you didn't think to warn me? To tell me what I was getting into?" "I didn't think it would happen this fast." For the first time, emotion cracked through his controlled exterior, something like pain, like regret. "I thought I had time. I was wrong." Silence stretched between them, brittle and breaking. Catalina's mind raced through the implications, through the terror of being hunted by people she'd never met for crimes she'd never committed. "What do we do?" "You stay here," Dante said, "with me, where I can protect you." "For how long?" "Until it's safe." "And when will that be?" He didn't answer, couldn't, and in that silence, Catalina understood. She wasn't being offered protection. She was being offered a cage. A beautiful, comfortable, necessary cage, but a cage nonetheless. The room they gave her was larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked gardens where fountains whispered secrets to the evening air, where paths wound through roses that bloomed impossibly perfect. The bed could have fit 4 people comfortably. The bathroom had heated floors and a shower with jets that promised to wash away more than just dirt. Everything was cream and gold and soft, designed for comfort, for luxury, for making someone forget they were a prisoner. Because that's what she was. Catalina understood this with crystalline clarity as she stood at those windows, watching the sun set over grounds enclosed by walls she hadn't noticed on the way in. Dante had been careful with his words, gentle with his explanations, but the truth remained. She couldn't leave. Not safely. Not until he said so. And when that might be, he couldn't say. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, her voice sounding strange in all this space. A woman entered, middle-aged, kind-faced, carrying an armload of clothing. "Mr. Moetti asked me to bring these for you," she said with a soft accent Catalina couldn't place. "He wasn't sure of your size, so there's a variety. I'm Elena. I manage the household. If you need anything, anything at all, you just ask me, yes?" "Thank you," Catalina managed, taking the clothes with hands that felt numb. "Elena, how long do people usually stay here?" Elena's smile faltered slightly. "That's not for me to say, dear. But Mr. Moetti, he takes care of his people. You'll be safe here. That's what matters." Safe. The word tasted wrong in her mouth. How could she be safe when everything she knew had been ripped away? Her job at the bakery, would they hold her position, or had she already been replaced? Her apartment, with rent due in 2 weeks. Her brother, who called her every Thursday evening like clockwork. What would she tell him? How could she explain this nightmare? That first night, Catalina didn't sleep. She lay in the too soft bed, staring at the ceiling that was too far away, listening to the silence that was too complete. Her life had been loud, neighbors shouting, traffic humming, pipes groaning through thin walls. This house was sealed away from the world, wrapped in quiet so thick it felt suffocating. She reached for her phone, thought about calling her brother, but what would she say? I'm fine. Just staying at a Mafia boss's estate because people want to kill me to get to him. No. She couldn't do that. Couldn't drag him into this darkness. Instead, she texted Dante. I can't stay here. His reply came within seconds. Where else would you go? Home. My life. My job. None of those places are safe anymore. Catalina. I wish I could tell you otherwise. Then fix it. End this. Whatever you need to do to make it safe again. Do it. A longer pause this time. Then, I'm working on it. I promise you, I'm working on it. How long? I don't know. She threw the phone across the room, heard it clatter against something expensive that didn't break. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't change anything. Wouldn't undo the fact that she'd been stupid enough to fall for a man whose world devoured everything it touched. She should have known. Should have walked away that first night in the restaurant. Should have listened to every instinct screaming that Dante Moetti was beautiful and dangerous and would destroy her. But she hadn't. And now here she was. Days blurred together. A week passed, then two. Elena brought meals that Catalina barely tasted. Someone, she never saw who, left fresh flowers in her room every morning. Books appeared on her nightstand, ones she might have mentioned loving years ago, though she couldn't remember telling Dante about them. He was everywhere in this house. His presence soaked into the walls even when he wasn't physically there. Which he wasn't, much. He came to her room once a day, usually in the evening, and stood at the threshold like he needed permission to enter his own house. How are you? He'd ask. How do you think? She'd reply. And he'd nod, accepting her anger like penance, before saying, soon. I promise. Soon. But soon stretched and never arrived. Catalina started walking the grounds, measuring the walls, counting the cameras. Not because she seriously thought she could escape. Where would she go that his enemies couldn't find her? But because she needed to do something, anything, to feel less helpless. The gardens were extensive, maze-like. She found a library in the East Wing, a music room with a piano that had probably cost more than her childhood home. She found rooms full of art, rooms empty of everything, rooms that looked like they were waiting for purposes that never came. And slowly, against her will, she found herself settling. Not accepting, never that, but adjusting. The terror that had gripped her those first days began to loosen its hold, replaced by something more insidious, routine. She woke at 8, breakfast at 9, morning walk through the gardens, lunch at 1, afternoon in the library, dinner at 7, Dante's visit at 8, sleep that came easier than it had any right to. If this story has already found a place in your heart, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more stories that stay long after they end. It was in the 4th week that everything shifted again. Catalina was in the library, curled in a chair by the window with a book she wasn't really reading, when Dante entered. But this time he didn't stop at the threshold. He came inside, and she noticed immediately that something was wrong. His suit jacket was missing. His shirt was untucked. And when he sank into the chair across from her, she saw what he'd been hiding, blood seeping through the white fabric, staining it crimson. Jesus! She breathed, the book falling from her hands. What happened? It's nothing, Dante said, but his voice was tight with pain. It's not nothing. She was moving before she thought about it, crossing to him, her hands hovering over the wound without touching. You need a doctor. I have a doctor. He'll be here soon. His eyes found hers, and in them she saw exhaustion so deep it seemed to have no bottom. I needed to see you first. Why? Because you're the only thing that makes sense in anymore. The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Catalina knelt beside his chair, careful not to jostle him, and for the first time since she'd been brought here, she really looked at Dante Moetti. Not at what he represented or what he'd done to her life, but at him, at the man who was bleeding in front of her, at the shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, at the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders, in the line of his jaw. "What happened?" she asked again, softer this time. "The people who wanted to hurt you to hurt me, I convinced them it would be a mistake." A ghost of his smile. "Permanently. You killed them. I protected what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her, should have reminded her that she was still a captive, still trapped. Instead, it sparked something in her chest, something warm and terrifying and completely inappropriate given the circumstances. "I'm not yours," she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. "Aren't you?" Dante reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted the blood on his shirt. "You've been living in my house, sleeping under my protection, occupying my thoughts every waking moment, and most of the sleeping ones too. If you're not mine, Catalina, whose are you?" She should have pulled away, should have reminded him that protection and possession weren't the same thing, that she'd never asked for any of this, that he'd stolen her life and wrapped it in silk and expected her to be grateful. But his hand was warm against her skin, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult, and somewhere along the way, in the days and weeks of careful questions and evening visits and the strange intimacy of captivity, something had shifted inside her. "I hate you," she said. "I know. You've ruined everything. I know that too. I want to leave. I know." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. "But you won't. Not yet. Because you're too smart to die for pride, and that's what would happen if you left now." The worst part was that he was right. The worst part was that somewhere in the past month, the cage had started to feel less like captivity and more like sanctuary. The worst part was that when she looked at Dante Moetti, bleeding and exhausted and still somehow the most vital person she'd ever met, she didn't feel only anger anymore. A door opened somewhere in the house. Voices echoed down the hall. "That'll be the doctor," Dante said, pulling his hand back, leaving cold air where his warmth had been. "You should go. You don't need to see this." But Catalina didn't move. "I'm staying." "Catalina, you don't get to decide everything," she said firmly. "You wanted me here. You brought me to your house, into your world, made me part of whatever this is. You don't get to protect me from the blood now." Something changed in his expression then. Surprise, maybe, or respect, or something deeper that she couldn't name. He nodded once, and when the doctor arrived with his black bag and professional detachment, Catalina stayed. She watched as they cut away Dante's shirt, revealing the bullet graze along his ribs. Watched as they cleaned and stitched and wrapped. Watched his face, the way he clenched his jaw against the pain but never made a sound. Watched and understood, perhaps for the first time, what it cost him to exist in the world he'd built. Later, after the doctor left and Elena had brought fresh clothes and discreetly vanished, Catalina helped Dante into a clean shirt. Her hands were gentle, careful of his injury, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "You can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Protecting everyone else while you bleed." "It's what I do," Dante said simply. "It's all I know how to do." "Then learn something else." She finished with the last button, let her hands rest against his chest where she could feel his heart beating. Strong, steady, alive. "Because I can't watch you die, Dante. I can't. I'd barely survived losing everyone else I've cared about. I won't survive losing you." The words escaped before she could stop them, and the moment they left her mouth, she knew the truth of them. Knew that somewhere between the anger and the fear and the suffocating routine of beautiful captivity, she'd fallen. Not all the way, not yet, but far enough that the thought of his death felt like her own. Dante's hands came up to cover hers. "You won't lose me," he promised. "I'm too stubborn to die, and too selfish to leave you." "Is that supposed to be romantic?" No. His smile was small and real. It's supposed to be true. If you've ever felt torn between fear and love, you'll understand her. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Your support keeps stories like this alive. That night, Dante didn't leave at 8. He stayed in the library with Catalina, sitting across from her in comfortable silence, and she found she didn't mind. Found, in fact, that his presence had become something she looked for, counted on, needed in ways that frightened and comforted her in equal measure. The cage was still a cage. The danger was still real. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely trapped. Maybe she'd walked in willingly. Maybe she'd stay the same way. The months that followed took on a strange, dreamlike quality. Catalina existed in a world suspended between freedom and captivity, between fear and something dangerously close to contentment. The estate became familiar, its corridors mapped in her memory, its rhythms learned like a second language. She knew which floorboards creaked, which windows caught the morning light, which corner of the garden bloomed brightest in afternoon sun. She knew Elena's schedule, the doctor's biweekly visits, the way the house seemed to breathe differently when Dante was home versus when he was away. And he was away often. Sometimes for days. He'd leave before dawn without explanation, return after dark with new wounds hidden beneath expensive suits. She'd learned not to ask where he went or what he did, not because he'd forbidden the questions, but because she wasn't sure she wanted the answers. It was easier to pretend that the blood on his clothes came from somewhere abstract, that the phone calls he took in locked rooms discussed nothing more sinister than business. But ignorance was its own kind of cage, and Catalina had never been good at lying to herself. She knew what Dante was, what he did, the violence he enacted in the name of protection, of power, of whatever code governed the dark world he inhabited. She knew, and still, when he'd return home exhausted, she'd find herself in the study waiting for him. Still, she'd pour him whiskey without being asked. Still, she'd sit with him in the silence until the tension drained from his shoulders and something like peace settled over his features. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," he said one night, the request echoing that first dinner a lifetime ago. "I already told you everything," Catalina replied, though they both knew that wasn't quite true. "Then tell me something new. Something that's happened since you've been here." She considered this, swirling the wine in her glass, watching how the liquid caught the firelight. "I'm not unhappy," she said finally. "I should be. I'm a prisoner in everything but name. But some mornings, I wake up and forget to be angry. Some days, I walk through the gardens and feel peaceful, and that terrifies me more than the danger ever did." Dante was quiet for a long moment. "Why?" "Because it means I'm adjusting, accepting, becoming someone who can live like this." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "What does that make me?" "Human," he said simply. "Adaptable. Survivor. Or broken." No. The word was fierce, absolute. Never broken. Changed, maybe. But you bend, Catalina. You don't break. It's one of the first things I noticed about you. When? When you were stalking me before we met. A slight smile curved his mouth. "I wasn't stalking you. I was observing." That's literally the definition of stalking. "I saw you in the bakery," Dante said, his voice going softer, more distant. 3 months before that night at the restaurant. You were serving an old man who couldn't count out his change properly, and you pretended not to notice when he came up short. Paid the difference yourself. He never knew. I was picking up an order, supposed to be in and out, but I watched you do it and I thought, here's someone real. Catalina's breath caught. "You've known who I was for 3 months. Longer. I started asking questions. Found out you worked 2 jobs, put your brother through school, lived in a 4th floor walk-up you could barely afford. Found out you declined help from friends, from charities, from anyone, because you're too proud or too stubborn or too used to carrying everything alone." His gray eyes met hers, and I thought, what kind of strength does it take to live like that? What kind of person keeps getting up every morning when life keeps knocking them down? So you, what? Decided to knock me down yourself? Take away everything I'd built? No. Dante leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. I decided I wanted to know you. I decided that if you'd let me, I'd make sure you never had to carry anything alone again. And then Daniel stood you up, and I saw my chance, and I took it. I'm not sorry. You should be. Probably. But I'm not. The fire crackled between them. Outside, rain had started, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the windows like impatient fingers. Catalina should have been angry, should have hated him for admitting he'd orchestrated their meeting, for watching her, for making decisions about her life without her consent. But beneath the anger was something else, something that whispered he'd seen her when she'd felt invisible, that he'd looked at her struggle and thought not asterisk pathetic asterisk but asterisk strong star, that he'd wanted her before he had any claim to wanting her. I need to call my brother, she said, changing the subject because the alternative was too dangerous. He's stopped believing my excuses about why I can't see him. What do you want to tell him? I don't know. Not the truth. He'd do something stupid, try to rescue me or confront you all. She trailed off, helpless. Bring him here, Dante said. What? Your brother. Bring him here. Let him see you're safe, unharmed. Let him spend a weekend, meet you in a space where he can verify you're okay. Dante's expression was unreadable. I know what it's like to worry about family. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Tears burned behind Catalina's eyes, unexpected, unwanted. It was the kindness that undid her. She could have handled cruelty, cold indifference, the impersonal efficiency of captivity. But this consideration of what she needed, who mattered to her, this broke something open inside her chest. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me for giving you the bare minimum of human decency. In your world, maybe this is the bare minimum. In mine. She shook her head. No one's ever cared enough to ask. Something flickered across Dante's face. Pain, maybe, or regret for the life she'd lived before him. He stood, crossed to her chair, and knelt so they were eye to eye. I care, he said, his voice rough with emotion he usually kept locked away. More than I should. More than is safe for either of us. Every time I leave this house, I'm afraid I won't make it back. Not because I fear death. I made peace with that possibility years ago, but because I fear leaving you alone. I fear what would happen to you if I wasn't here to protect you. That fear drives me more than anything else. Catalina's hand lifted almost of its own accord, her fingers brushing the scar above his eyebrow, the one she'd noticed that first night. How did you get this? I was 12. My father's enemies came to our house. His jaw tightened. I watched him die trying to protect my mother. Failed to save her. Swore that day I'd never be powerless again. Is that why you do this? Build this empire. Surround yourself with walls and weapons. Partially. Also because I'm good at it. Because the alternative is letting chaos rule, and chaos is crueler than any order I could impose. He caught her hand, pressed it flat against his chest where his heart beat steady and strong. But lately, I'm starting to think I built all this just so I'd have something worth protecting when you finally came into my life. That's insane. Probably. His smile was sad, knowing. But it's true anyway. They stayed like that, her hand on his heart, his eyes on her face, and Catalina felt the last of her resistance crumbling. She'd held onto her anger like a shield, used it to maintain distance, to remind herself she was a victim here. But victims didn't wait up for their captors, didn't pour them drinks and tend their wounds and feel their absence like a physical ache. Victims didn't fall in love. Oh God, she was falling in love with Dante Moetti. The realization hit like a physical blow, stealing her breath. She pulled her hand back, stood up too quickly, nearly stumbled. Dante rose with her, his hand steadying her shoulders, his expression concerned. "Catalina." "I need to sleep," she said, the words tumbling out too fast. "It's late. I should go. Did I say something wrong?" "No. Yes. I don't know." She was moving toward the door, desperate for space to think, to breathe. "I just need." "Tell me." He caught her wrist, gentle but insistent. "Whatever just happened, whatever you're feeling, tell me." "I can't." "Why not?" Because saying it out loud would make it real. Because once she admitted it, there would be no taking it back. No pretending this was still simple captivity and inevitable proximity. Because loving Dante Moetti meant accepting his world, his violence, his darkness, and she didn't know if she was strong enough for that. "Please let me go," she whispered. He did. Immediately. His hand dropped away and he stepped back, giving her space even though she could see it cost him. "You're not my prisoner, Catalina. You never were. The danger is real, but if you want to leave, I'll make sure you have protection wherever you go. You just have to say the word." "What word?" "That you want to leave me." The challenge hung in the air between them, because they both knew, had known for weeks now, that the danger was just an excuse, that she could have insisted on bodyguards, on safe houses, on a dozen alternatives to living in his home, that she stayed not because she had to, but because some part of her wanted to, because every day she spent here, she chose not to ask for those alternatives. "I can't say that," Catalina admitted, her voice barely audible. "Why not?" "Because it would be a lie." The words seemed to hit Dante like a bullet. His entire body went still, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. "What are you saying?" "I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying or what I'm feeling or what any of this means." Her voice broke. "I only know that when you leave, I count the hours until you come back. That when you're hurt, I feel it in my own body. That somewhere along the way, this stopped being about safety and started being about something else. Something I'm not ready to name." Dante closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with a reverence that made her chest ache. "Say it anyway." "I can't." "Catalina, please." "Because if I say it, it becomes real. And if it's real, I have to accept what you are, what you do. I have to look at the blood and the violence and the darkness and say, yes, I choose this. I choose you, and I'm not sure I'm brave enough for that." "You're the bravest person I've ever met." "No, I'm just good at surviving." "That's different." "It's not." His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Surviving is choosing life every day even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when it would be easier to give up. You've been doing that your whole life, Catalina. This is just another form of the same choice. Loving you isn't survival. It's... She couldn't find the words. "It's suicide." "Then die with me," Dante whispered, and kissed her. The world stopped. Every thought, every doubt, every fear dissolved in the heat of his mouth on hers. He kissed her like she was oxygen, like she was the answer to every question he'd never known to ask. His hand slid from her face to her hair, tangling in the dark strands, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. And Catalina, who had spent a lifetime being careful, being cautious, being safe, kissed him back like she was drowning and he was air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he breathed. "Not because you're in danger. Not because you have nowhere else to go. Stay because you want to. Because this, whatever this is between us, is worth exploring. Worth fighting for." "I'm scared." "So am I." "You don't seem scared." "I'm terrified." His laugh was shaky, almost vulnerable. "Every day I'm terrified I'll do something to lose you. That you'll wake up and realize you deserve better than a man with blood on his hands. That one day you'll look at me and see only the monster." "I already see the monster," Catalina said softly. But I also see the man who pays for old men's pastries, who brings me books I mentioned once in passing, who kneels beside my chair and asks me to tell him something true. You're not one thing, Dante. You're everything. And that's what scares me, that I could love all of you, even the parts one should run from. Could love? He asked, hope fragile in his voice. Or do love? She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had seen her from the beginning, that looked at her like she mattered more than empires. I don't know yet, she admitted, but I think I'm willing to find out. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't a promise, but it was enough. She could see it in the way his face transformed, in the smile that spread slow and genuine across his features, in the way he pulled her close and held her like she was precious, irreplaceable. His, if your heart's racing too, take a breath. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below for more unforgettable love stories. They stood there in the study, wrapped in each other, as the fire burned low and the rain drummed its steady rhythm. And for the first time since she'd arrived at the estate, Catalina felt something other than fear or anger or resignation. She felt possibility, hope, the dangerous, beautiful promise of what might come next. Her brother visited the following weekend. Matteo was 19, tall and gangly, with a mother's eyes and a wariness that broke Catalina's heart. He'd hugged her so hard she'd lost her breath, pulled back to examine her face like he was checking for evidence of harm. Dante had made himself scarce, strategically absent so Matteo could speak freely, but his presence lingered in every expensive detail, every too perfect comfort. Are you okay? Matteo had asked immediately. Really okay? Because your messages have been weird, and you never visit anymore, and I was starting to think. I'm fine, Catalina assured him. Better than fine, actually. Who is he? Who's who? Whoever owns this place, whoever you're staying with. Matteo wasn't stupid. He'd looked around the estate with sharp eyes, cataloguing the security, the luxury, the unmistakable sense of power. This isn't some friend's house, Cat. So who is he? She'd told him a version of the truth, that she'd met someone, that circumstances had led to her staying at his home, that yes, he was wealthy and yes, he was protective and no, she wasn't in danger. Matteo had listened with a skepticism that reminded her painfully of how much he'd grown up, how much her absence had forced him to mature faster than he should have. You love him, Matteo had said finally, not a question. Maybe. I don't know yet. Does he love you? He says he does. Do you believe him? That was the question, wasn't it? Did she believe that Dante Moetti, a man who dealt in violence and power, who could have anyone, truly loved her? A woman with nothing to offer but a stubborn heart and rough hands and the kind of practical strength that came from years of barely surviving. Yes, she'd answered, surprising herself with the certainty. I do. Matteo had hugged her again, whispered in her ear, then be happy, Cat. For once in your life, just be happy. After he left, Catalina had cried, not from sadness, but from the relief of his permission, as if she'd needed someone else to tell her it was okay to choose something for herself, to choose someone who chose her back. Spring came to the estate with brutal beauty. Everything bloomed at once, roses and jasmine and honeysuckle climbing the walls, their fragrance so thick it felt like drowning in sweetness. The days grew longer, warmer, and Catalina found herself spending more time outside, walking the grounds until her skin bronzed and her shoulders relaxed into something that resembled contentment. She'd been at the estate for 5 months. 5 months that had transformed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The fear that had defined those first weeks had faded, replaced by a routine that felt less like captivity and more like life. She woke when sunlight touched her windows. Breakfast with Elena, who'd become something close to a friend. Mornings in the library or garden. Lunch in the conservatory where orchids bloomed in impossible colors. Afternoons however she pleased, reading, walking, or increasingly, waiting for Dante. Because he'd started coming home earlier. Started rearranging his schedule around hers. Started showing up for lunch instead of just dinner. For breakfast instead of just good night. He'd walk with her through the gardens, his hand finding hers like it belonged there. He'd read beside her in the library, both of them comfortable in silence. He'd ask her opinion on things, business matters she didn't fully understand but that he explained with patience until she did. He was courting her, she realized. Inside the cage he'd built, he was wooing her as if she had a choice. And maybe that's what made her soften, the recognition that he was trying, that he could have demanded, could have taken, could have used his power to claim her. Instead, he asked, waited, gave her space to come to him in her own time. Tell me about your family, Catalina said one afternoon as they sat by the fountain, her head resting against his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Not much to tell. My father built this empire from nothing. My mother tried to civilize him. It worked, mostly, until it didn't. Dante's voice was carefully neutral. They died when I was 12. I told you that part. And after, I was raised by my father's associates. Learned the business young. Took over at 21 when the old guard decided I'd learned enough. A pause. Or maybe they just got tired of the infighting and figured a Moetti heir would unify everyone. Either way, I inherited an empire and all its enemies. Do you wish you could have done something else? Been someone else? Sometimes, when I was younger, I wanted to be an architect. Design buildings instead of criminal enterprises. He laughed softly. Ironic, right? I still ended up building things. Just different kinds of structures. Catalina tilted her head to look up at him. It's not too late. You could still. No. The word was gentle but final. This is my life. My legacy. I made peace with it years ago. His fingers traced patterns on her arm. But I think about it sometimes. About the man I might have been in a different world. A world where you could have met me without danger attached. Would you have noticed me? In that different world? Yes. No hesitation. In any world, Catalina, every version of me would find every version of you. It's inevitable. That's not how reality works. Maybe not, but it's how this reality works. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, even if we met in darkness. Especially because we met in darkness. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept the pretty words and the gentle touches and the way he looked at her like she hung the moon. But doubt was a habit she'd learned young, and trust was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. What happens when this ends? She asked quietly. What do you mean? When the danger is over, when I could leave safely, what happens then? Dante went very still. Do you want to leave? I don't know, but I need to know that I could, that this is a choice, not just circumstances forcing us together. You could leave tomorrow, he said, his voice tight. I told you that months ago. The physical danger passed weeks after you arrived. I eliminated the threats. Permanently. Catalina sat up, pulling away from him, her heart hammering. What? The people who would have hurt you, they're gone. Have been for 4 months. Then why? The word stuck in her throat. Why am I still here? Because I didn't tell you. Dante's expression was unreadable, carved from stone. Because I'm selfish and cruel and I wanted you here even if the only way to keep you was through deception. She should have been furious, should have felt betrayed, used, manipulated. And she did. Anger flared hot in her chest, spreading through her limbs like fire. But beneath it was something else. Something that felt suspiciously like relief. You've been lying to me for 4 months. Yes. Letting me think I was trapped. Yes. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why not just tell me the truth? Ask me to stay. Dante stood, paced away from her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he spoke, His voice was raw with emotion she'd rarely heard from him. Because I was afraid you'd say no. Because I knew that without the excuse of danger, you'd have no reason to stay. Because I'm a coward who'd rather keep you in a beautiful cage than risk losing you to freedom. You don't know what I would have said. Don't I? He turned to face her, and his eyes were full of a pain that made her chest ache. You told me yourself, loving me is suicide. Being with me means accepting violence and darkness and a world that operates outside every law, every moral code you were raised with. Without danger forcing your hand, what rational person would choose that? Maybe I'm not rational. Maybe you're too rational. Too smart to tie yourself to a man like me unless you had no other choice. The words hung between them, heavy with truth and fear and the weight of 4 months of deception. Catalina stood slowly, her legs shaking, her mind racing through every interaction, every moment she'd thought she was trapped. How many times had she stayed in this house not because she had to, but because she wanted to? How many times had she told herself it was necessity when really, it was choice? You're right, she said finally. You are selfish and cruel, and you had no right to keep that from me. Dante flinched like she'd struck him. I know. But you're also wrong. She crossed to him, stood close enough to see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that she'd walk away and never come back. You're wrong that I would have left. You're wrong that I stayed only because of danger. You're wrong about what I want. What do you want? You, Catalina said, the word simple and devastating. I want you. Not because I'm trapped. Not because I have nowhere else to go. Not because you've given me comfort and safety and all the things I never had before. I want you because you see me. Because you ask me to tell you something true and then you listen like it matters. Because you're terrible and beautiful and you make me feel alive in ways I didn't know I could feel. Catalina. I'm not finished. She placed her hand over his heart, felt it racing beneath her palm. I'm angry that you lied. Furious that you manipulated me. But I'm also grateful because it gave me time. Time to understand what this is, what you are, what we could be. And now I know. Without doubt, without danger forcing my hand, I choose you. I choose this. I choose us. The kiss was different this time. Desperate where before it had been tender, hungry where before it had been exploring. Dante pulled her against him like he was trying to merge their bodies, like he could keep her through sheer force of will. And Catalina kissed him back with everything she had, all her anger and fear and love tangled together into something that felt like freedom. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you have me anyway. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. That's all I ask. Before we close this chapter, take a moment, like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below. Every small gesture helps the next story find its way to you. They stood in the garden as the sun set, wrapped in each other, and Catalina understood that this was the real turning point. Not the night at the restaurant, not the weeks of captivity, but this moment, when she chose him freely, when she walked into the darkness with open eyes and said yes anyway. Love wasn't always safe, wasn't always rational. Sometimes it was beautiful and terrible and transformative all at once. That night, she didn't go back to her room. She followed Dante to his, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the estate, she truly felt like she belonged. Not because she had to be there, but because she wanted to. Because she'd chosen him, and he'd chosen her. And together they were building something new from the broken pieces of their pasts. The danger might have been a lie, but what they'd found in its shadow was real. Raw and complicated and messy, but real. And for Catalina Rivera, who'd spent her whole life fighting to survive, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The truth changed everything and nothing. Catalina was still at the estate, still in Dante's world, but now the walls felt different. Not barriers, but choices. She could leave anytime she wanted, could walk out the front gate and never look back. The knowledge sat in her chest like a key she'd discovered she'd been carrying all along. She stayed, not because she was trapped, but because leaving would have meant walking away from something that had become essential. Dante was essential. Not in the way air or water was essential, but in the way that certain people become woven into the fabric of your existence so thoroughly that removing them would unravel everything. They were different after that conversation by the fountain. More honest. More careful with each other. Dante stopped disappearing without explanation. He'd tell her when he had to leave, what the broad strokes of his business were, when he'd return. He never gave her details, never burdened her with the specifics of violence and negotiation and the dark machinery that kept his empire running, but he gave her enough that she felt included rather than sheltered. And Catalina stopped pretending she didn't care where he went. Stopped acting like his absence didn't matter, like the hours he was gone didn't stretch interminably. She'd wait up for him, curled in his bed with a book, and when he'd return, sometimes exhausted, sometimes wired with adrenaline, she'd be there, a constant, an anchor, the thing he came home to. "I want to meet them," she said one evening as they lay tangled together, his fingers tracing laser patterns on her shoulder. "Meet who?" "The people who work for you. The ones who are part of your world." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "If I'm going to be with you, really be with you, I need to understand all of it. Not just the parts you think are safe for me to see." Dante's expression shifted, surprise mixed with something that looked like pride. "It's not pretty, Catalina. These aren't boardroom executives. They are soldiers, enforcers, people who've done things that would give you nightmares." "You've done things that would give me nightmares. I'm still here." "That's different." "Why?" "Because you've compartmentalized it, kept me separate from that part of your life." She shook her head. "I don't want to be separate. I don't want to be the pristine thing you keep locked away while the rest of your world bleeds. I want all of it, or none of it. You choose." He studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes searching hers for doubt, for fear, for any sign she didn't mean what she was saying. He must not have found it, because finally he nodded. "Okay, but if at any point it's too much, you tell me, and we stop." "I will." "I mean it, Catalina. Your safety, physical and psychological, matters more than your pride or your curiosity." "I know." She kissed him softly, "but trust me enough to know my own limits." The meeting happened 3 days later in the estate's west wing, a section of the house Catalina had never been invited to. Dante led her through corridors that grew progressively more utilitarian, the luxury of the main house giving way to functionality. Security cameras tracked their progress. Men in dark suits nodded respectfully as they passed, their eyes sliding over Catalina with carefully neutral expressions. The room Dante brought her to was large, dominated by a conference table where 5 people already sat today. They stood when Dante entered, a synchronized show of respect that was probably unconscious at this point. These were the people who ran his empire. She understood that instinctively. The advisors, the generals, the ones who turned his orders into reality. "Everyone, this is Catalina Rivera," Dante said, his hand resting at the small of her back. "Catalina, this is my inner circle. Marco, my second." A man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes nodded. "Sophia, who handles intelligence." A woman younger than Catalina would have expected, beautiful and cold. "Antonio, logistics." Stocky, powerful, with scars mapping his knuckles. "Lucia, finances." Elegant, wearing designer glasses and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And Vincent, security. Vincent was the youngest, maybe 30, with the controlled stillness of someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was. When his eyes met Catalina's, she saw calculation there, an assessment being made, judgments being formed. "Pleasure to meet you," Marco said, his voice warm despite the circumstances. "We've heard a lot about you." "Oh, good, I hope," Catalina replied, managing a smile despite her nerves. "Dante doesn't talk about anything unless it's good," Sophia said, and there was something almost teasing in her tone. So yes, all good. They sat, and for the next 2 hours, Catalina was given a crash course in how Dante Moetti's empire actually functioned. They didn't hide anything, didn't soften the reality of what they did. They talked about territory and rivals, about shipments and payments, about violence as a business tool and loyalty as currency. They discussed problems like they were chess pieces to be moved, competitors who needed to be discouraged, politicians who needed to be persuaded, alliances that needed to be maintained. It should have horrified her. In many ways, it did. But it also fascinated her, the complexity of it, the way these people navigated a world with entirely different rules than the one she'd known. They weren't monsters, she realized. Or maybe they were, but they were intelligent monsters, strategic monsters, monsters who operated with their own code of ethics even if that code bore no resemblance to conventional morality. "You're quiet," Dante said during a break, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I'm processing." "Too much." "No, it's just different than I imagined." "Different how?" "More organized. More like a business." She glanced at the others, who were clustered in small groups, talking in low voices. "I think I expected something more chaotic. More violent." "The violence happens," Dante said quietly. "But it's controlled. Purposeful. We're not barbarians, Catalina. We're business people who happen to operate outside legal frameworks." "That's a nice way of saying criminals." "Yes, but there are degrees. We don't deal in sight and things. No drugs, no human trafficking, no predation on the vulnerable. Those are lines I won't cross." "Why?" "Because my father crossed them, and I watched what it cost him, cost us, cost everyone around him." His jaw tightened. "I built something different. Something that still exists in shadows but doesn't create more victims than necessary." "Necessary victims," Catalina repeated softly. "Is there such a thing?" "In my world? Yes. In yours?" He looked at her, and there was sorrow in his eyes. "Probably not. That's the difference between us." But the difference was smaller than he thought. Because Catalina had grown up in poverty, had watched the law fail to protect people like her mother, had seen how the system abandoned those it deemed unworthy of saving. She understood, in ways she'd never examined too closely, why someone might choose to operate outside that system. Why they might build their own structure when the official one didn't serve them. The meeting ended with plans made and roles assigned. As people filed out, each stopped to say goodbye to Catalina, some with warmth, some with reservation, all with respect. Vincent was last, lingering by the door. "A word?" he asked Dante. "Go ahead." Vincent glanced at Catalina, then back to Dante. "She's a vulnerability. You know that." "I know." "Then why?" "Because some vulnerabilities are worth having." Dante's voice was firm, final. "She stays. She's part of this now. Anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." Vincent nodded slowly, and something in his expression shifted. Acceptance, maybe, or at least acknowledgement. "Understood. Welcome to the family, Ms. Rivera." After he left, Catalina turned to Dante. "I'm a vulnerability. The biggest one I have." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Loving you makes me weaker in every practical sense. Gives my enemies a target. Creates complications I'd never have to navigate alone. Sounds like you should let me go." "Can't. Won't. Same thing." His smile was crooked, self-deprecating. "I told you I was selfish." "You did warn me." They stood in that utilitarian room, surrounded by the evidence of Dante's empire, and Catalina felt the last piece of her old life slip away. She wasn't the woman who'd worked 2 jobs and barely survived in a mall. Wasn't the woman who'd been stood up at a restaurant and humiliated. She was Catalina Rivera, partner to Dante Moetti, stakeholder in darkness, lover of a man whose hands built empires and shed blood in equal measure. She should have been terrified, should have run while she still could. Instead, she stood on her toes and kissed him, slow and deep and certain, and chose this life one more time. The weeks that followed brought an education Catalina had never sought but found herself strangely suited for. She started attending more meetings, not as Dante's girlfriend but as something more integrated. She had a good head for numbers, it turned out, and Lucia began consulting her on financial strategies. She understood people, could read motives and moods, and Sophia started asking her opinion on intelligence reports. She wasn't making decisions, wasn't ordering anyone killed or territories claimed, but she was present, informed, part of the machinery that kept Dante's world running. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she became someone the inner circle respected, not because of who she was to Dante, but because of who she was in her own right. "You're good at this," Marco told her one afternoon as they reviewed shipping routes. "You see patterns I miss." "I spent years figuring out how to stretch $5 into 10, Catalina replied. "Same skill set, just bigger numbers." He'd laughed, a genuine sound that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Dante chose well. You're exactly what he needs." "What's that?" "Someone who reminds him why he built all this in the first place. Someone worth protecting." Marco's expression grew serious. His been different since you arrived. Lighter, like he remembers there's more to life than maintaining power. The observation stayed with Catalina long after Marco left. She'd been so focused on how Dante had changed her life that she hadn't considered how she might have changed his. But watching him over dinner that night, the way he laughed more easily, the softness that crept into his expression when he looked at her, she saw what Marco meant. She'd given him something he hadn't had before. Not just love, but purpose beyond survival. A future that looked like more than just maintaining territory and eliminating threats. "What are you thinking about?" Dante asked, catching her staring. "How different you are from when we met." "Different how?" "Happier, or at least, less alone." She reached across the table, lacing her fingers through his. "You carry it better now. Whatever weight you're holding. Because you helped me carry it." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I told you that night in the study, you're the only thing that makes sense anymore. That's still true. More true every day. Even when I'm a vulnerability. Especially then. Being vulnerable means having something worth losing. I spent years with nothing to lose, Catalina. It made me efficient, ruthless, but it also made me hollow." His eyes held hers. "I'm not hollow anymore. You filled all those empty spaces." The declaration should have felt like pressure, like responsibility for his happiness, his wholeness. But instead, it felt like recognition. Because he'd done the same for her. Had taken a life defined by survival and transformed it into something that resembled living. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier than they had any right to. "I don't think I've said it clearly enough. But I do. I love you." Dante went very still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. "Say it again." "I love you." Stronger this time, more certain. Not despite what you are, but including it, all of it, the darkness and the danger and the beautiful, terrible things you've built. "I love you." He was around the table before she could blink, pulling her to her feet, his mouth finding hers with desperate intensity. The kiss tasted like relief and hunger and years of wanting things he'd thought he couldn't have. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion he usually kept locked away. "I've loved you since the moment you told me you were tired," he said roughly. "Since you sat across from me in that restaurant and let yourself be vulnerable when every instinct probably told you to run. I've loved you through every day since. Through every argument and every moment of resistance and every time you've looked at me like I'm both your salvation and your destruction. I will love you until the day I die, Catalina Rivera. That's a promise." She believed him, believed it in the marrow of her bones, in the beating of her heart that had somehow synced with his. This love wasn't safe or simple or anything close to what she'd imagined love should be, but it was real, raw and honest and powerful enough to transform them both. That night marked a shift, subtle but significant. They stopped holding back, stopped carefully navigating around the intensity of what they felt. Dante told her things he'd never told anyone, his fears, his regrets, the nightmares that woke him at 3 a.m. And Catalina let him see her completely, not just the strong, resilient woman who'd survived poverty and loss, but the scared one underneath. The one who still worried everything would fall apart. The one who sometimes felt like she didn't belong in his world no matter how hard she tried to fit. They fought sometimes. Real arguments where voices rose and doors slammed and both of them said things they'd have to apologize for later. But they always came back to each other. Always worked through it. Because walking away wasn't an option anymore, not when leaving would mean tearing out a piece of themselves. Summer arrived with heat that made the estate shimmer like a mirage. Catalina had been with Dante for 8 months, and in that time, she'd become someone new. Or maybe she'd become who she'd always been underneath the exhaustion and fear. She was confident now, comfortable in her own skin in ways she'd never been. She wore expensive clothes without discomfort, navigated social situations with ease, held her own in rooms full of dangerous people. But she hadn't forgotten where she came from. Still visited Matteo regularly, sometimes at the estate, sometimes at his apartment near campus. Still kept in touch with the few friends from her old life who'd accepted her explanations without too many questions. Still sent anonymous donations to the bakery where she'd worked, to the hospital that had treated her mother, to the people and places that had shaped her. "You're thinking about her again," Dante said one evening as they walked through the gardens. He'd learned to read her silences, to know when her mind had drifted to the past. "My mother." "Yeah." Catalina leaned into him, accepting the comfort of his arm around her shoulders. "I wish she could have met you. Wish she could have seen me like this, happy and safe and actually living instead of just surviving. What would she have thought of me? Honestly, she probably would have been terrified. Then she would have seen how you treat me, and she would have decided you were acceptable." A sad smile. She was practical like that. Cared less about what you did than how you did it. As long as you were honorable in your own way, she could respect it. "I would have tried to be worthy of her approval." "You would have failed. No one was ever good enough for her children in her eyes." Catalina stopped walking, turned to face him. "But she would have loved you eventually, because I love you, and she always wanted me to be happy." "Are you?" The question was quiet, almost vulnerable. "Happy?" "Yes." No hesitation. "Happier than I ever thought I could be, than I ever thought I deserved to be." "You deserve everything." "I have everything. I have you." They stood in the fading light, surrounded by flowers that bloomed just for them, and Catalina felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or acceptance, or just the quiet certainty that this was where she belonged, not because circumstances had forced her here, but because she'd chosen it. Again and again and again. She'd chosen this life, this love, this man who held her like she was precious. If stories like this linger in your heart long after they end, don't leave just yet. Like, comment, subscribe, and check the description box below, and let the next story find you when the night grows quiet again. The peace wouldn't last. Catalina knew that even as she reveled in it. Dante's world was too volatile, too dangerous for permanent serenity. But for now, for this moment, everything was perfect. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything she'd never known she wanted, wrapped in the arms of a man she'd never expected to love. The storm came in autumn, when the leaves turned gold and red and the air carried the promise of winter. Catalina had been with Dante for nearly a year that had transformed her so completely she barely recognized the woman she'd been before. That woman seemed like a ghost now, a memory of someone who'd existed in a different lifetime. But ghosts have a way of returning when least expected. It started with a phone call. Dante took it in his study, his expression growing progressively darker as he listened. When he hung up, He sat motionless for several minutes, staring at nothing. Catalina, who'd been reading in the corner, set down her book and waited. She'd learned that sometimes silence was the only question that would get an honest answer. "There's a problem," Dante said finally. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves you." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Someone's been asking questions. About you. About us. About your old life." He looked at her then, and she saw something in his eyes that frightened her more than anger or violence ever could. "Fear. They've approached Matteo." The world tilted. "Is he okay?" "He's fine. Vincent got to him first. Brought him here as a precaution." Dante stood, began pacing. "But whoever's behind this, they're not amateurs. They knew exactly what buttons to push, what to offer him." "Offer him what?" "Money. Lots of it. In exchange for information about you. About what you know, what you've seen, what role you play in my organization." Catalina's mind raced. Who would want that information? "Several people. Rival organizations who think you're a weakness to exploit. Law enforcement hoping to flip you into an informant." "Oh." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Someone from my own organization who thinks you're a liability." "You think someone on your team is betraying you?" "I think it's possible. Which means I can't trust anyone right now. Anyone except you." The implications settled over her like a shroud. For the first time since she'd integrated into Dante's world, Catalina felt truly unsafe. Not from external threats, though she'd learned to navigate, but from the possibility that the people she'd come to know, to trust, might be waking against her. Against them. Matteo arrived within the hour, escorted by Vincent. He looked shaken but unharmed, and relief flooded through Catalina as she hugged him. "I'm sorry," he said against her shoulder. "They approached me on campus. Said they just wanted to talk, that they were concerned about your safety. By the time I realized something was wrong, Vincent was there." "You didn't do anything wrong," Catalina assured him. "You couldn't have known." But the incident changed everything. Suddenly, the estate felt less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress under siege. Security was tripled. Movement was restricted. The inner circle was questioned, not gently, about their loyalties and activities. Catalina watched Dante transform back into the man she'd glimpsed at the beginning, cold, calculating, trusting no one. The investigation took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of tension so thick it felt like breathing through water. Catalina spent most of her time with Matteo, keeping him company while Dante handled the darkness. She tried not to think about what handling might entail, tried not to imagine the methods being used to extract truth from people who'd become almost family. When Dante finally came to her, his face was carefully neutral. "We found them." "Them?" "Antonio and Sofia. They've been selling information to the Kozlov family for 6 months. Since right around the time you arrived, actually." His voice was flat, drained of emotion. "They thought you were making me weak. Thought if they could create enough chaos around you, I'd either let you go or lose my grip on the organization." Catalina felt sick. Antonio with his scarred knuckles and dry humor. Sofia with her intelligence reports and cold efficiency. She'd worked with them, learned from them, thought they'd accepted her. "What will you do to them?" "What I have to do." He looked at her then, and she saw the weight of it in his eyes. "This is my world, Catalina. This is what it means. People betray, people die, and I'm the one who makes those decisions. Can you live with that?" It was the question she'd been avoiding for a year, the reality check she'd needed but hadn't wanted. Because loving Dante meant accepting this, accepting that he was capable of ordering deaths, that he would do so to protect what was his, that she was what he was protecting, which made her complicit in whatever came next. "I don't want to know the details," she said quietly. "But yes, I can live with it." "You're sure? Because once this happens, there's no pretending anymore. No maintaining plausible deniability." "I'm sure." She crossed to him, took his hands in hers. I chose you, Dante. All of you. That includes the parts that make terrible decisions to keep me safe. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. Sometimes I think you're the only good thing I've ever done. And even that I'm doing wrong, dragging you into this, making you complicit, turning you into something you never wanted to be. You didn't drag me anywhere. I walked in with open eyes. She pulled back, forcing him to look at her. And you didn't turn me into anything I wasn't already becoming. I'm not some innocent you corrupted, Dante. I'm a woman who chose a life because it gave her something worth living for. Don't take that choice away from me by shouldering all the responsibility. You're too good for this world. Maybe, or maybe I'm exactly what this world needs. Someone who can love you without losing herself. Someone who can be part of the darkness without becoming it. She kissed him softly. Do what you have to do. I'll be here when it's done. Antonio and Sofia disappeared that night. No drama, no confrontation, just their one moment, gone the next. The organization absorbed their absence like water filling a void. Marco took over Antonio's responsibilities. A man named Victor stepped into Sofia's role. Life continued because life always did in Dante's world. But something had changed in Catalina. She'd crossed a line she hadn't known existed. Acceptance not just of Dante's violence in the abstract, but in the concrete. Two people she'd known, worked with, almost liked, were dead because they'd threatened her. And she'd given her blessing. Told Dante to do what he had to do. That should have broken something in her. Should have made her hate herself, hate him, hate everything they'd built. Instead, it clarified things. She understood now, with crystalline precision, what this life actually meant. What it cost. What it would continue to cost. And she chose it anyway. Are you okay? Matteo asked one morning over breakfast. He was staying at the estate for a few more days until Vincent confirmed it was safe for him to return to his normal life. I think so. Why? You seem different. Quieter. He studied her face. Did something happen? Something you're not telling me. A lot happened. Most of it I can't talk about. But you're okay? Really? Catalina considered the question. Was she okay? By any normal standard. No. She was complicit in murders. She'd become an integral part of a criminal empire. She'd chosen love over morality, safety over principle. But by the standards of the life she'd chosen, the world she now inhabited, I'm exactly where I need to be, she said finally. That's the best kind of okay I can manage. Matteo reached across the table, squeezed her hand. Mom would be proud of you, you know. Not the specifics. She probably wouldn't love the specifics, but the fact that you found someone who loves you enough to burn the world down to keep you safe. She always wanted that for you. Tears burned behind Catalina's eyes. You think so? I know so. She told me once, right before she died, that you'd spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. That she wished someone would take care of you for once. He smiled. I think Dante counts, even if his methods are unconventional. After Matteo left, after Vincent assured them the immediate threat had passed, life at the estate settled back into routine. But it was a different routine now. Catalina was no longer the outsider being integrated into Dante's world. She was fully inside it, with all the knowledge and complicity that entailed. She attended meetings not just to observe but to participate. She offered opinions that were taken seriously. She became, in every sense that mattered, Dante Moetti's partner. And with that partnership came both power and peril. People looked at her differently now, not as Dante's weakness, but as an extension of his strength. They treated her with respect that bordered on fear. They understood that hiding her meant facing Dante's wrath. Yes, but also that she was capable in her own right. That she understood their world and operated within it with increasing confidence. You've become formidable, Marco told her one afternoon. They were reviewing personnel issues, deciding who to promote, who to reassign, who to watch more carefully. When you first arrived, I thought you'd be a distraction. Something Dante would tire of eventually. I was wrong. Why? Because you didn't try to change him or soften him or make him into something more palatable. You accepted what he was and chose to stand beside him anyway. That's rarer than you might think. He paused. And because you've changed yourself without losing yourself. You've adapted to this world while maintaining the core of who you are. That takes strength most people don't have. The observation stayed with her. Because Marco was right, she had changed. But she was still Catalina Rivera, daughter of a woman who'd fought for every breath, sister to a brilliant boy she'd sacrifice anything to protect, survivor of a life that would have broken weaker people. She was just more now, more confident, more powerful, more certain of her place in the world. That certainty would be tested again. Had to be. Dante's world didn't allow for extended periods of peace. But for now, as autumn deepened and winter approached, Catalina allowed herself to simply exist. To wake up beside the man she loved, to work alongside people she respected if not fully trusted, to build a life that looked nothing like what she'd imagined but felt completely right nonetheless. She was happy, truly happy, and if that happiness was built on a foundation of darkness and moral compromise, well, no one's happiness was pure. Everyone made choices, accepted trade-offs, decided what they could live with. Catalina had simply been more honest about hers than most people ever had to be. Winter came to the estate like a held breath, silent, cold, waiting for something to break. Snow fell in soft layers, muffling sound, transforming the gardens into something ethereal and strange. Catalina watched it from the windows of Dante's study, wrapped in a blanket, while he walked at his desk behind her. The quiet companionship had become their favorite state. No need for conversation, just the comfort of proximity. They'd been together for 14 months now. 14 months that had contained entire lifetimes of change. Catalina barely remembered the woman who'd sat alone in that restaurant, humiliated and hopeless. That woman belonged to a story that had ended the moment Dante sat down across from her and said stay star. I have something for you, Dante said, breaking the comfortable silence. Catalina turned from the window. He was holding a small box, velvet and expensive looking. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. What is it? Open it and see. She crossed to him, took the box with hands that trembled slightly. Inside was a key, old-fashioned, ornate, beautiful. What does it open? Nothing. Everything. Dante stood, took the key from her fingers, held it up to the light. It was my mother's, the only thing of hers that survived after everything. My father gave it to her on their wedding day, told her it was the key to his heart, his home, his whole life. Dante. Tears gathered in her eyes. I'm not proposing, he said quickly. Not yet. Not until you're ready. But I want you to have this. Want you to know that you already have all of me, my heart, my home, my life. Whether or not we make it official doesn't change that truth. Catalina took the key back, closed her fingers around it. The metal was warm from his hand, solid and real. Why not yet? Because you need to be sure. Not just that you love me, I know you do, but that you can live with what being married to me means. That you can accept a life where danger is always present, where moral lines always blurred, when normal doesn't exist. His hands cupped her face. I won't trap you with vows until you're absolutely certain that's what you want. And if I'm already Satan, are you? She thought about it, really thought about it. Marriage to Dante Moetti would mean more than love and commitment. It would mean legal entanglement with his empire. It would mean becoming a target in ways she wasn't fully yet. It would mean accepting that her life would never be simple, never be safe, never be anything close to conventional. But it would also mean waking up beside him every morning for the rest of her life, coming home to him every evening, building something permanent and real and entirely theirs. And when she weighed those truths against each other, the answer was obvious. Ask me, she said. Catalina. Ask me properly. Right now. Because I'm certain. I've been certain for months. I was just waiting for you to be ready. Dante went very still. Then, slowly, he sank to one knee in front of her, his hands taking hers, his eyes holding hers with intensity that stole her breath. Catalina Rivera, you walked into my life when I'd given up on anything resembling happiness. You saw the worst parts of me and chose to stay. You've made my darkness bearable, my world livable, my future something worth planning. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? Yes. The word came out steady, certain, irrevocable. Yes, I'll marry you. The kiss was different from all the others. It tasted like promises and futures and the strange, beautiful certainty that they'd chosen each other completely. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Dante slipped a ring onto her finger. She hadn't even noticed him retrieve it, hadn't seen him prepare for this moment. But the ring fit perfectly, simple, elegant, a single diamond that caught the light like captured fire. When did you get this? She asked, admiring how it looked on her hand. 6 months ago. Been carrying it around ever since, waiting for the right moment. His smile was crooked, almost shy. Kept talking myself out of asking because I wanted you to be sure. But I should have known. You're always sure. It's one of the things I love most about you. That night, they called Matteo first. He whooped so loudly through the phone that Catalina had to hold it away from her ear, laughing despite herself. Finally, he said. I was starting to think Dante was never going to make it official. When's the wedding? We just got engaged 10 minutes ago. We haven't planned anything yet. Well, plan fast. I want to walk you down the aisle before I graduate. Deal. They told the inner circle next, gathering everyone in the main hall where champagne was produced and toasts were made. Marco hugged Catalina hard enough to lift her off her feet, whispering, "Welcome to the family officially." Lucia cried, which surprised everyone including herself. Vincent shook Dante's hand with something close to a smile and told Catalina, "You're good for him. Don't let him forget it." Even in the midst of celebration, Catalina felt the weight of what she'd agreed to. So in the careful way some people congratulated her, in the calculation behind their eyes as they reassessed what her position meant. Being Dante's girlfriend had been one thing. Being his fiancée, soon to be his wife, was something else entirely. She would have legal standing, inheritance rights, authority that couldn't be easily dismissed or set aside. She was becoming a queen of the underworld, and the crown came with thorns. The wedding planning happened faster than Catalina expected, not because they rushed, but because Dante's resources made everything effortless. She wanted small and intimate. He arranged it. She wanted her mother's favorite flowers. They appeared. She mentioned once, in passing, that she'd always imagined getting married at sunset, and suddenly the entire ceremony was scheduled around golden hour. "You're being ridiculous," she told him one evening as they reviewed seating charts. "It's just a wedding." "It's our wedding," Dante corrected. "There's no just about it. This is the day I get to publicly claim you as mine, to stand in front of everyone who matters and declare that you're my family now. I'm allowed to be excessive. Excessive is buying me a dress that costs more than my childhood home. That dress makes you look like you're made of starlight, worth every penny." She shook her head, but she was smiling, because this was who Dante was, excessive and romantic and completely incapable of doing anything halfway, including loving her. The wedding took place on a Saturday in late February, when the world was caught between winter and spring, cold and warmth, ending and beginning. They held it at the estate, in the garden where roses bloomed impossibly despite the season. Dante had apparently paid a fortune to botanists to make it happen. Chairs was set up under a canopy of lights, and as the sun began its descent, casting everything in gold and amber, Catalina walked toward the man she loved. Matteo escorted her, his arm linked through hers, his pride obvious in every step. You sure about this? He whispered as they approached Dante, who stood at the altar looking like he'd forgotten how to breathe. More sure than I've ever been about anything, Catalina whispered back. The ceremony was simple, traditional vows exchanged in front of 50 people who represented both their worlds. Matteo cried. Marco looked suspiciously emotional. Even Vincent's expression softened into something almost tender. And Dante, stoic Dante who controlled his emotions like weapons, had tears streaming down his face as he promised to love, honor, and protect her for the rest of his life. I do, Catalina said when it was her turn, and the words felt like diving off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely right. I do, Dante echoed, and then he was kissing her, and the world exploded into applause and music and joy so pure it felt like pain. The reception lasted until dawn. People danced and drank and celebrated with an intensity that spoke to how rare happiness was in their world. Catalina danced with Matteo, with Marco, with a dozen others. But mostly she danced with Dante, his arms around her, his voice in her ear telling her she was beautiful, perfect, his Mrs. Moetti, he murmured as they swayed to music that felt like it was being played just for them. How does it sound? Strange. Good. She leaned back to look at him. Like I'm someone new. You're still you. Just mine now. Officially, irrevocably mine. Possessive. Always have been. You knew what you were getting into. She had. She absolutely had. And she'd chosen it anyway. Chosen him. Chosen this life. Chosen a future that would be complicated and dangerous and utterly unlike anything she'd once imagined for herself. As the night stretched toward morning, as guests finally began to leave, Dante swept Catalina into his arms and carried her inside. She laughed, protesting that she could walk, but he ignored her. Carried her through halls lined with people who'd become family. Upstairs she'd climbed 1,000 times, into a room that had transformed from a place of refuge into something more, a home. I love you, Dante said as he set her down, his hands framing her face with the gentleness he reserved only for her. For the rest of my life, Catalina Moetti, I will love you. I love you too, she replied, and meant it with every cell in her body. For all the rest of forever. They made love slowly, reverently, like they were learning each other all over again. And in the hours before dawn, wrapped in sheets that smelled like them, Catalina felt something settle in her chest that she'd been missing her whole life without knowing it. Belonging, not just to a person, but to a life, to a future, to herself. She'd been transformed by loving Dante Moetti. There was no denying that. But she hadn't been diminished, hadn't lost herself in the process. She'd simply expanded, become more than she'd been while remaining fundamentally herself. And that, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, was the real magic. Not that he'd saved her or she'd saved him, but that they'd saved each other. Two broken people who'd found in the wreckage of their pasts the building blocks for a future worth fighting for. The first year of marriage brought a peace Catalina had stopped believing in. Not the absence of danger that would never exist in Dante's world, but the presence of stability, routines and rhythms that felt like foundations rather than cages. She woke beside her husband every morning, and the word still thrilled her, still felt new and precious. She worked alongside him, the partnership extending beyond love into genuine collaboration. She built relationships with people in his organization, and respect that had nothing to do with being Dante's wife and everything to do with her own capabilities. Life became, impossibly, almost normal. I'm thinking about starting something, Catalina said one evening as they sat in the library. She'd been considering it for weeks, turning the idea over in her mind like a stone. Dante looked up from his papers. Starting what? A foundation. For people like I used to be, working multiple jobs, drowning in medical debt, trying to keep their families afloat while the world actively works against them. She'd been researching, planning, building a framework. I have resources now that I never had before. Seems wrong not to use them. I think it's a beautiful idea. You're not worried it might draw attention? Make us more visible. We're already visible, Catalina. Anyone who matters already knows exactly who we are. He set down his wake, gave her his full attention. Besides, using our resources to help people isn't a vulnerability. It's strength. Shows we're not just taking from the world, we're giving back. She crossed to him, settled into his lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. Have I told you lately that I love you? Not in the last hour. I was starting to worry. She kissed him, slow and deep, and felt his arms tighten around her. A year into marriage, and he still held her like she might disappear if he wasn't careful. Like she was precious beyond measure. The foundation launched 3 months later. The Catalina Rivera Foundation. She'd kept her name, refused to hide behind Moetti even though some advised it, provided grants for medical expenses, educational support, and emergency funds for people in crisis. She ran it herself, with help from a small staff, keeping it separate from Dante's business operations but funded by them nonetheless. You're doing good work, Marco told her at one of their monthly meetings. He'd become something like a friend over the years, or as close to a friend as anyone in their world could be. The community notices. You're changing how people see us, not just as criminals, but as complicated. We are complicated, Catalina replied. That's the truth everyone wants to ignore. We're not villains or heroes. We're people making choices in impossible circumstances. Careful. That kind of thinking will make you a philosopher. Or just a realist. The foundation work filled something in Catalina she hadn't realized was empty. She was helping people the way she'd once needed help, intervening before desperation forced them into choices they couldn't come back from. Every person she helped felt like a small rebellion against the poverty and powerlessness that had defined her youth. But the work also made her visible in new ways. News outlets covered the foundation's launches. Politicians sought her endorsement. People who'd once dismissed her as just Dante's wife began to see her as someone with power in her own right. And with visibility came attention, not all of it welcome. The first threat came via letter, anonymous, vague, but unmistakably sinister. It arrived at the foundation's office, addressed to Catalina personally. Vincent handled it, increased security, assured her it was just someone trying to frighten her. But more letters followed. Then calls. Then someone tried to follow her home from an event. We need to shut down the foundation, Dante said after the third incident. His voice was tight with controlled fury. At least temporarily. Until we identify who's behind this. No. Catalina's voice was firm. Catalina. No. I'm not stopping because someone wants to scare me. That's letting them win. I don't care about winning if it keeps you safe. But I do. She took his hands, forced him to look at her. I've built something real, something that matters. I'm not giving it up because of threats. We've faced worse. This is different. These people know where you work, where you go, who you meet with. They are studying you, Catalina, planning something. Then let them plan. We'll be ready. It was foolish, maybe, reckless. But Catalina had spent too long being afraid, too long letting fear dictate her choices. She'd built a life where she had agency, power, the ability to shape outcomes. She wouldn't surrender that because someone wanted her to remember her place. The attack came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon as Catalina was leaving the foundation's office. 3 men, armed, moving with the precision of professionals. They would have had her, should have had her, except Vincent had anticipated this exact scenario. He'd doubled her security, positioned people at every exit, prepared for violence. The gunfight lasted less than 2 minutes but felt like hours. Catalina found herself shoved into an armored car, Vincent covering her body with his own as bullets shattered windows and shredded metal. When silence finally fell, 3 men lay dead in the street, and Vincent had taken a bullet to the shoulder that he barely acknowledged. "Get her to the estate," he ordered his team, his voice steady despite the blood. "And call Dante. Tell him we have a problem." The drive back felt surreal. Sirens in the distance, Vincent applying pressure to his wound while giving orders, Catalina's hand shaking so badly she couldn't unbuckle her seatbelt. The reality of how close she'd come to dying settled over her like ice water. Another minute, another angle, and she would have been the one bleeding out in the street. Dante met them at the estate's gates, his face a mask of controlled terror. He pulled Catalina from the car, his hands running over her frantically, checking for injuries even as she assured him she was fine. "I'm okay," she kept saying. "I'm okay. Vincent saved me." "Vincent needs a hospital," someone said. "Private doctor is already on the way," Dante replied without looking away from Catalina. "Are you hurt? Tell me you're not hurt." "I'm not. I promise. Just scared." He pulled her against him then, held her so tight she could barely breathe, his heart racing against her cheek. "I can't lose. You," he whispered, his voice breaking on the words. "I can't. Do you understand? If something happened to you, there wouldn't be enough left of me to matter." Catalina held him back just as tightly, her own tears finally coming. "I'm here. I'm safe. You have me." They stood like that until Vincent was taken inside, until the security team had secured the perimeter, until Dante could finally breathe without feeling like his lungs were collapsing. Then he led her inside, to their room, and held her while she shook with delayed shock. "The foundation," she started, "is closing. Temporarily." He cut off her protest with a gentle hand over her mouth. "Not permanently. Not even for long. But until we identify who ordered this attack and eliminate them, you're not going anywhere near that office. That's not negotiable." "Dante. Please." The word was raw, desperate. "Please don't fight me on this. I watched you drive away in a bullet-riddled car. I saw Vincent's blood. I came within minutes of losing everything that matters. Give me this. Let me protect you until the threat is neutralized." She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence, her right to continue her work regardless of danger. But the terror in his eyes stopped her. Because this wasn't about control, it was about love so fierce it bordered on madness. And she understood it because she felt the same way. If their positions were reversed, if Dante had been the one in danger, she would have burned the world down to keep him safe. "Okay," she said quietly. 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to handle this, and then I'm going back." 2 weeks, he agreed, though they both knew it might take longer. The investigation moved with brutal efficiency. Dante didn't just pursue the men who'd attacked Catalina, he dismantled their entire organization. Within days, they'd identified the family responsible, the Salvatores, a rival group that had been losing territory to Dante for years. They'd seen Catalina's foundation, her visibility, as an opportunity to strike at him through her. They'd been right about the vulnerability, wrong about whether Dante would accept it as the cost of doing business. "It's done," he told her exactly 2 weeks later, his voice empty of emotion. "The Salvatores are finished. Everyone involved in ordering or executing the attack is dead. Everyone who knew about it and didn't stop it is dead. Anyone who might have considered similar action in the future has been given a very clear message about what happens when you threaten what's mine." Catalina should have felt relief. Instead, she felt numb. "How many? Does it matter?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. 17. Including 2 who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Collateral damage. 17 lives ended because someone had tried to kill her. 17 people dead because Dante loved her enough to wage war on her behalf. The weight of it pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "I didn't ask you to do that," she whispered. "You didn't have to." Dante crossed to where she sat, knelt in front of her. "This is who I am, Catalina. This is what I do when someone threatens my family. You knew that when you married me. Knowing and living with are different things." "Yes, they are." His hands took hers, squeezed gently. "If you can't live with it, if this is finally too much, I'll understand. I'll hate it. It'll destroy me, but I'll understand. Because I'd rather lose you to your conscience than lose you to violence. It was the question she'd been avoiding for 2 weeks. Could she live with this? With being the reason for so much death, however justified Dante believed it to be? Could she go back to the Foundation, continue her work, knowing what it had cost? She thought about the people she'd helped, the single mother who'd avoided eviction, the student who'd finished school, the families who'd buried their loved ones without drowning in debt. She thought about the good she'd done, the lives she'd changed, the small redemptions she'd offered in a world that rarely gave second chances. And she thought about the attack, the terror of those 2 minutes, the sound of bullets, the certainty that she was about to die, the knowledge that in Dante's world there were people who would kill her just to hurt him. I can live with it, she said finally. I don't like it. I'll probably never fully be at peace with it. But I can live with it because the alternative, giving up my work, hiding away, letting fear win, that would kill me slower but just as surely. Relief flooded Dante's features. You're sure? No, but I'm certain anyway. She pulled him up into her arms, holding him like he'd held her. We're building something here, Dante. Something complicated and morally grey and probably indefensible to anyone outside our world. But it's ours, and I'm not giving it up. The Foundation reopened 3 weeks later with security measures that transformed it into a fortress disguised as a charity office. Catalina returned to work with Vincent always nearby, with protocols in place for every conceivable threat. She met with recipients in controlled environments, traveled in armored vehicles, lived with the constant awareness that she was a target. But she also continued helping people, continued making a difference in individual lives, continued proving that even in darkness, light could find a way through. You're different since the attack, Matteo observed during one of his visits. He'd graduated now, was working as an engineer, building a life that was separate from but adjacent to hers. Harder, maybe, or just more aware. I can't afford to be naive anymore, Catalina replied. If I ever was. Does it scare you, living like this? Every day. But the alternative, living small, living safe, never taking risks, that scares me more. She smiled. Besides, I married a man who wages wars. Fear comes with the territory. Time continued its inevitable march. Another year passed, then another. Catalina turned 30 in the estate's garden, surrounded by people who'd become family. The Foundation grew, expanded its reach, helped hundreds then thousands. She became known not just as Dante Moetti's wife, but as someone formidable in her own right, a woman who navigated danger with grace, who balanced compassion with pragmatism, who understood that sometimes the only way to help people was to operate outside the systems designed to keep them down. She and Dante fell into rhythms that felt like forever, mornings tangled in sheets, evenings planning futures, nights where they'd lie awake and whisper secrets to each other like teenagers. They fought sometimes, real arguments about important things, but they always came back together, always chose each other over being right. Do you ever regret it? Dante asked one night, his voice quiet in the darkness. Saying yes to me that night in the restaurant. Every day, Catalina replied honestly. Then, at his sharp inhale, and I'd say yes again every single time. The regret and the certainty coexist. That's what love is when it's real. Choosing someone even when part of you knows it's complicated, difficult, possibly destructive. Choosing them anyway because the alternative is unthinkable. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you have me anyway. She turned in his arms, pressed her forehead to his. We've built something impossible here, Dante. A life that shouldn't work but does. A love that shouldn't survive but thrives. We're proof that people aren't just one thing, that we can be dark and light, damaged and whole, flawed and still worthy of happiness. You make me want to be better. You make me brave enough to be myself. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, as the night deepened around them. And Catalina thought about that woman in the restaurant, Scared and humiliated and so desperate for connection she'd ignored every red flag. That woman had no idea what was coming. No idea that the man who'd sit down across from her would transform her entire existence. But she'd said yes anyway, had taken his hand and stepped into darkness and found that sometimes, on the other side of fear, there's something worth all the risk. 5 years after that night in the restaurant, Catalina Moetti stood in the Foundation's new headquarters and watched sunrise paint the city gold. The building was hers, purchased with money that was clean, if you didn't look too closely at its origins. 6 stories of glass and steel dedicated to helping people who'd fallen through society's cracks. She'd helped thousands now, changed lives, given people chances they'd never have had otherwise. Mrs. Moetti. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. Your 9 o'clock is here. Send them in. The woman who entered was young, maybe 25, with the haunted look Catalina recognized from her own reflection years ago. She was drowning. You could see it in her eyes, in the way she held herself like the world might shatter if she moved wrong. Thank you for seeing me, the woman said, her voice shaking. I didn't know where else to go. Tell me what you need, Catalina replied gently. Stout from the beginning. As the woman talked about medical bills and eviction notices and a brother who needed her help, Catalina listened with the full attention she'd learned from Dante. She asked questions, took notes, built a picture of this stranger's life and the ways the Foundation could intervene. We can help, she said when the woman finished. It'll take some time to arrange everything, but you're not going to lose your apartment. Your brother's medical expenses will be covered, and we'll connect you with our job placement program. I don't understand. Tears streamed down the woman's face. Why would you do this? You don't know me. No, but I know what it's like to be where you are, and I know what a difference it makes when someone offers a hand instead of judgment. Catalina smiled. Pay it forward someday. That's all I ask. When you're stable, when you're okay again, help someone else the way I'm helping you. After the woman left, Catalina stood at her window and looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, Dante was handling his business, the dark machinery that kept their world running. She didn't ask for details anymore, didn't need to know the specifics of what he did. She knew enough that he was ruthless when necessary, strategic always, and absolutely devoted to protecting what they'd built together. Her phone buzzed. A text from him. Asterisk thinking about you to asterisk. She smiled, texted back. Asterisk always are just right now. Asterisk. Asterisk always. But especially right now. Come home early tonight. Asterisk. Asterisk what's the occasion? Asterisk. Asterisk does there need to be one? Asterisk. Asterisk I suppose not. I'll be home by 6. Asterisk. She spent the rest of the day in meetings, reviewing grant applications, planning expansions. The Foundation had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. Branches in 3 cities now, plans for 5 more, a reputation that had started attracting legitimate philanthropic support. She was washing money through charity work, yes, but she was also actually helping people. The moral ambiguity of it had stopped bothering her somewhere along the way. Dante was waiting when she arrived home, standing in the garden where they'd married, his hands in his pockets and something nervous in his expression. Catalina's heart stuttered. She knew that look, had seen it exactly once before, the night he'd proposed. What's wrong? She asked, crossing to him. Nothing's wrong. He took her hands, held them gently. Everything's right, actually. Better than right. Perfect. Then why do you look nervous? Because I'm about to ask you something, and I'm not sure how you'll respond. He took a breath. I want to have a child with you. The words hung in the air between them. A child. A baby. Their baby. Catalina had thought about it over the years, imagined it in abstract ways, but they'd never discussed it seriously. Their lives were so complicated, so dangerous. How could they bring a child into this world? I know what you're thinking, Dante continued. I know all the arguments against it, but I'm asking anyway because I want to build something that lasts beyond us. I want to see you hold our baby. I want to teach them everything I know, protect them from everything that hurt us. I want a family, Catalina. With you. Only with you. She thought about all the reasons to say no. The danger, the moral complications, the fact that any child of theirs would be born into a legacy of violence and power. But she also thought about Dante's face when he looked at Matteo, the gentleness he'd cultivated despite everything. She thought about the love they'd built, messy and complicated but real. She thought about how they'd both been broken when they met and had somehow healed each other. Yes, she said, the word escaping before she'd fully processed the decision. Yes, I want that too. The joy that transformed Dante's face was like sunrise. He pulled her close, kissed her with desperate happiness, held her like she'd just given him the world. And maybe she had. Maybe they'd give each other a world, a small one, precious one, entirely theirs to shape and protect. I love you, he breathed against her lips. God, Catalina, I love you so much. I love you too, even though you're insane and this is probably a terrible idea. All our best ideas are terrible. He laughed, the sound bright and young. We'll figure it out. We always do. And they would, because that's what they did, took impossible situations and forged something beautiful from the wreckage. They'd done it with their lives, their love, their complicated, dangerous, utterly unconventional existence. They'd do it with a child too. As the sun set over the estate, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Catalina thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago. That woman would never have believed this future was possible. Would never have imagined standing in a garden with a man who loved her fiercely, planning to bring new life into a world they'd built together from darkness and determination. But she'd said yes that night, had chosen trust over fear, possibility over safety. And that choice had led her here, to this moment, this man, this life that was hers in every way that mattered. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For sitting down at my table. For giving me a choice, for loving me enough to let me become who I needed to be. She pulled back to look at him, for asking me to tell you something true that first night, for seeing me when I felt invisible. You were never invisible, Dante said softly. Not to me. From the moment I saw you, you were the most visible thing in the world. They stood in the garden as stars emerged, holding each other the way they always had. Like they were both fragile and indestructible at once. Like they'd survived things that should have broken them and chose to be whole anyway. Like love wasn't always simple or pure, but it was always worth it. And somewhere in the city, in a restaurant that had witnessed a beginning, an empty table sat waiting for the next story to unfold. The next person to say yes to something impossible. The next life to pivot on a moment of courage or desperation or fate. But that was someone else's story. This one belonged to Catalina and Dante, to the woman who'd been stood up and the man who'd made sure she'd never be abandoned again. To two people who'd found each other in darkness and decided that together they could generate their own light. It wasn't a fairy tale, wasn't neat or conventional or anything close to what either of them had imagined their lives would become. But it was real, raw and beautiful and complicated and utterly, perfectly theirs. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.